And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest, who's also a noted author. Jeff Grupp has been a college teacher at Grand Valley, Western Michigan, Purdue campuses, and Indiana University. At some of the branch campuses there, he taught philosophy and Eastern philosophy, ethics, metaphysics, and Buddhism. A couple of his books include Theologic, The Telescreen, Corporatism, Telemation. Those are all different names of different books. His websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com. He was last on our program 3 years ago. Jeffrey, welcome back.
Hey, George. So good to talk to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself? Everything well?
Yeah, everything's really good. Life is a crazy adventure and just doesn't seem to slow down, but I guess that's the way I like it, so no problem.
That's right. Speaking of adventures, how did you get involved in dealing with the subject at hand we're going to talk about tonight?
Okay, I used to be an atheist and a Buddhist, which is a confusing issue that atheism and Buddhism go together, but typically they do. And that was my life until a number of years ago, and I really hit Buddhism hard. I wrote a book called Telemation, which was on Buddhist meditation, and it was really a wonderful ride being a Zen Buddhist. I specifically studied Soto Zen Buddhism, which is Japanese, and Hubert Benoit's book, Zen and the Psychology of Transformation, really is probably my favorite book that really teaches how to do that. And George, I really hit that hard. I got out of high school and sort of was depressed and didn't like the opportunities given to me. I had my parents said they wouldn't pay for college unless I, studied something I didn't want to study, like science or something. And I wanted to study theology and philosophy and all that. So I got depressed and angry and so forth, and I just really wanted an escape from life, and I found Buddhism, and I hit it so hard, and I really got to some of those nirvanic experiences. There's no question. Those anybody can get to those. All you have to do is just do the work of the Buddhist meditation. That Benoit book is a great source for learning exactly how to do it. You just have to be absolutely determined, and I was. And there was a period in 1995 in my mid-20s, for about a month, a little less than a month, that I really hit that nirvanic state like nobody's business. And briefly, let me go to the next to answer your question. So that I sort of stayed a Buddhist and an atheist for years after that, and got a couple degrees and started teaching in college and publishing and so forth. And then my wife became a Christian in 2007, and that sort of was a big shock to the system. That
to you, yeah.
Everything was fine with our marriage, but that really changed things. And in 2010, she said to me, as I was leaving for a long trip to drive in the car, she said, "Why don't you just try praying? If it's real, don't you want to know?" Because she knew what I'd say to that. She said, "If you don't give it a try, you're not being fair. You have to. What if it's true? Wouldn't you want to know the truth? And if it's not true, nothing will happen." So that really, of course, got to me. And so I'm driving on this trip for 3 hours. And when I get to the hotel at midnight, I'm sitting in the hotel parking lot. I'm thinking, okay, I'll do this. And so I really actually spoke, and I said, here's how the prayer went, George. It basically said, if there's some mind that created all this, my mind and everything I see around me, this world and universe and everything, what is the deal, the game with being invisible so we can't see? And so then the prayer goes on. I said, if you show yourself to me, I will, that I'll lay down my life and be, pursue you forever. That's all I'll be interested in. Because if you're really true, I want the truth, and I'll go after you, and I'll devote everything to you. But I'm not going to believe what somebody says. I'm not going to believe what it says in a book. You have to show yourself to me. So then I kind of forgot. It was at the end of the prayer, I did have this sort of profound experience that I was literally in communion with the mind, God or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, being an atheist, I put it out of my mind, like I was just my imagination and so forth. So this goes, then a couple years later, out of the blue, George, I start having these, let me tell as much as would be safe to tell. It was a very wild experience that went on for 4 months.
Go for it.
Just out of the blue. So in my house, I lived near Ann Arbor at the time. I live in Kalamazoo now.
And I'm a Detroiter, by the way, just so you know.
Pardon me?
I've been a Detroiter most of my life.
Yeah, no, I know. Yep, I used to teach at U of M Dearborn. I know your mother lived right up the road.
Yep, she's still there. She's still there.
Ah, good, yep. And so out of the blue, I start having two simultaneous things happening at the same time. And this is let's call this a January period. I start experiencing what I thought was a ghost in our house. right in the same corner of the house all the time. Now, George, I'm not a drug user. I'm not a drinker, nothing. This is just so, it's happening, first starts at night, and then it kind of starts to creep in during the day, and it's like nothing I've experienced before. I had a ghost experience once before in 2007. It was an auditory experience only of a child ghost or something. It was very non-scary or anything. It was quite pleasant and quite an interesting experience. But this was absolute. I was utterly terrified by the energy of this thing, whatever it was. Okay, so then simultaneously at the same time, I start getting scared about roads. Like I started thinking that we're going to get in crashes, and people start swerving at us a lot. Like weird things happen,
Jeez.
and all this. And also, a third thing actually happens is my family starts getting really sick. The kids get sick, especially my one son.
Unusually sick.
Oh yeah, nobody's really sick much, and then all of a sudden he sort of gets a mental illness and physical illness, but really a mental illness. And so to keep moving on with this story here, this intensifies, and I start having dreams about car crashes, and very specific, like we're going to get in a crash in the back corner of our Jeep, and my wife will give me a phone call. Nobody will get hurt, but the car will be basically totaled. Near-death experiences for several people. Blah. So this goes on, and then also the experience of the ghost that I'm seeing. This sort of goes out of control over a 3-month period, and I start seeing it in mirrors. I'm seeing it during the day. And it becomes more and more vivid. I thought it was a woman in a wedding dress, and then it gets extremely vivid and utterly powerful, like a power I've never experienced before. And a number of other very dark creatures is the best way to put it. I could go into more detail about this.
Demonic type?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. I didn't know that at the time because I was so terrified by this stuff, George. I mean, usually I like to think of myself as an adventurous guy. I want to discover the big stuff.
Sure.
But this was utterly terrifying, and I was, as soon as these would come in flashes in my mind, and I would I'd look away. It's like try to shut it out of my mind. I started going kind of crazy, to be honest, George, and everybody's getting sick.
I don't blame you. Jeez.
Pardon me?
I don't blame you.
Yeah, I'm calling mental institutions thinking I'm going nuts, and I'm having these dreams, and there are weird things correlated in reality. Like people are swerving out. There's many near. I thought it was a coincidence, of course. We're in all these near crashes. I'm like, wow, this is. I didn't put it together. I'm having dreams about this kind of stuff, and also kind of waking dreams about car crashes and all this wild paranoia. I'm telling my wife, don't go on certain roads and blah blah blah. So then it all reaches this incredible climax, and guess what happens? My wife calls, and I knew the phone call. The second I was standing up and walking out the door before she even said the exact words that appeared in a dream to me. Says, "We got hit."
Oh.
And so I go down to the crash scene, and it's a wild scene. It was a 3-car crash. A high school girl texting, and the dad of her trying to pick a fight with me, and they had to call in extra police, and it was pretty wild scene, complete chaos. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with my wife and 4 kids. I don't have my car now. I've got to put them in this little teeny car that I drive.
And were they hurt at all?
No, nobody was. The middle car, I don't know how that girl's not dead. She was injured. And you should have seen her car, George. Car doors, 100 feet away from the car. I don't know what happened, how it happened. But in our car, her car went under ours. Under our Jeep. And, George, when we moved to Ann Arbor, we lived in the country outside of Ann Arbor, and we got a Jeep because it was higher up. We wanted, because of the snow.
Right.
Because we did have a minivan, and I'm telling you, George, if we still would have had that minivan, a couple of my kids would have been dead.
That's it. That's right.
So anyways, so then I get home, and, it's just pure chaos and blah, blah, blah. And then I sit there, and I'm like, wait a minute. I don't sense any of this stuff. These beams that I'm seeing constantly, all this stuff that was everything's gone. And so I go downstairs, and I'm thinking, this is completely, what's going on? Because it was a very, very serious issue. I'm calling mental institutions and everything right up to the point. And as soon as I went downstairs and I thought about this, I immediately knew, because the first time in 4 months I looked at all this stuff without being filled with utter terror, and I could sort of objectively, that is, without fear, and honestly take a look at what I'd been seeing. And I knew right away it was what you would refer to as a spiritual war in the Old Testament or New Testament, and all down to very specific details. And from right at that point, I became I was an atheist, really basically an atheist before that. There was wavering a little bit in a couple years, just for some philosophical reasons. I wasn't as stern of an atheist as I was in my 20s and up till about 38 years old. But I immediately my first prayer was like, was to God. I was like, "Oops, sorry, I didn't know."
Well, how do you know, though, Jeffrey, that this wasn't your intuition as opposed to some kind of godly intervention?
Yeah, like you mean, how did I know it wasn't a big hallucination?
Well, yeah, that it was just that the thoughts of accidents weren't premonitions from you. Your own psychic ability, let's say.
Yeah,
as opposed
I wrote a book on telementation, which is about the mind creating.
Right. As opposed to a God intervention.
The best way, that's a great question. The best way to answer that question is with epistemology, or vivency, as John Curtis go on in his book Art, Trance, and Creativity. He comes up with this concept of vivency, and that's the idea that my like right now, George, I know I'm awake, and I'm staring at a computer screen. I've got a book in front of me here, and I don't question that I'm in a waking state. And when I'm asleep tonight and I have a dream, when I wake up out of the dream, I'll have a different set of epistemological feelings and a different epistemological set. And the vivency of that state will be such that I'll know it was a dream, and I won't question it. So the only way to answer that is when I was having these experiences, and I had another one on July 5, 2016, that was far more powerful than all this. Basically, I would say it was an experience of the Holy Spirit, to put it most simply. But in that state, there was what I was experiencing, I know, was the spiritual realm in my epistemology. Now, I can't prove that to anybody. It's not a scientific situation. It's not like we can do tests on what I saw, and it's like I'm telling you about a dream or a vision or something. But in my own epistemological mindset, I basically moved to the thesis that what I saw was real, and was not of the physical realm, was of the heavens. There's dark and light creatures in the heavens, and it was the epistemology was such that I'm convinced that it was real.
All right, well, stay with us, Jeff. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk more and more about this. It's just a tremendous story. Jeff Grupp, our special guest here on Coast to Coast AM. He's got a number of books that you can get off his website at coasttocoastam.com. And once you get that, of course, you can just pick them up and study them. What's your favorite book, Jeffrey?
Well, the one on theology I've written called Theologic. If you go to my website, you go to the info part, it's in there. I've got another one coming out, which will have my big simulation theory article. Everything's also free. Anything that's in the book is also free on my website. But yeah, the Theologic book there's quite a few things in that book that I think haven't really been discovered before.
All right, well, stay with us. We will be back in a moment with Jeff Grupp as we talk about why he was an atheist and why he isn't anymore, next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. We are with Jeff Grupp. We will take your calls with Jeff next hour as we talk about really what turned him from being an atheist to a believer. It's a remarkable story, Jeff.
Yeah, let me fine-tune a couple points. So to answer your question briefly, why I would say it's not a hallucination is because just like I know I'm awake now, and I don't question that because I have a certain mental state, then during having those religious episodes, I had a mental state that told me sort of the same thing, that there's no need to question, just like I don't question that I'm awake right now. And going back to my website real quick, praiseandlove.net is my site. That book, Theologic, that I mentioned, let me just clarify, so everybody knows, if everything in that book is free on my site also, so I don't have to necessarily buy the book unless they wanted to. But that book is really just I sort of hit this emergency when I became converted to Christianity, because I was an atheist. I knew all the arguments against Christianity. I thought it was a complete joke. I thought Christianity made no sense, and so forth. And all of a sudden, I had this experience that sort of negated all of that. And I was a Christian.
The epiphany happened.
I didn't know what to do. So I've sort of entered this project ever since then, and that's involved me being in seminary for several years, becoming a pastor. Now I'm a chaplain in a prison church now. And that book is part of that, trying to make sense out of Christianity, basically like trying to answer some of the questions here that I don't think really people have I don't know about all this dating, Christ really, if he was really 2,000 years or whatever, who knows. But since the time of Christ till now, I don't think anybody's really answered a lot of these things, like the problem of evil and are there multiple universes, and is this the only one that God created? There's so many questions that Christians are offered, and they don't have answers. Like predestination, something which really nobody wants to touch. But you open the Bible, and it fills the Bible. Karl Barth, probably the second most famous theologian after C.S. Lewis in the 1900s, he said that the whole message of the Bible is predestination, and nobody will touch it now because nobody knows what to do. And that was kind of what I was all of a sudden faced with within the first 6 months of being a Christian. I mean, and also things got going quick. My one son that I told you about that sort of had a mental disease.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned something briefly when I was on Coast last time about how I was watching The Exorcist as a way of to start, shortly after this all happened, to try to just study, demonology and so forth to figure out when the world happened. And I quickly realized watching that movie that my one son was demon possessed. And George, I literally exorcised him. And he changed. I couldn't believe my wife. We still can't believe the change that happened overnight when he was. I did it while he was asleep, and we woke up the next morning. He hadn't talked to us in several months. His skin color was different. He's talking. He's eating. It was an the skin rash that he had was gone. It was an unfathomable, sci-fi-ish Hollywood style, event. And I've been involved in a couple more of these since that time with various people. And man, I'll tell you, you experience a couple of those, and you get real serious about understanding there's two worlds here. There's the physical world, and exactly what that is a question. But then there's also a spiritual world, and this of course, many people all over the world. You don't have to be a Christian to know there's a spiritual world. A lot of people know that all over the place, even if you're involved in something like Satanism or whatnot. So. Anyway, if anybody doubts that I was an atheist, if you go to my website, praiseandlove.net, go to the CV section and scroll down to my publications. I published quite a few articles when I first started teaching, and you'll see the fourth one down listed as an article where I'm trying to create a new argument for atheism. I wrote it in 04 and 05, and it was published in 06 in Sophia, which is one of the very highly regarded professional academic philosophy journals on the philosophy of religion, and I'm in there trying to create a new argument disproving the existence of God. So there was no joke. I was not messing around with atheism. Was very pleasurable for me when I liked the idea of I've kind of always been in this concept of where I like to think of myself as not important. I like to think of my life as not important. That's a real Buddhist sort of vibe there, where it gives one peace, to take yourself off the pedestal. And you think of all the monks and Greek philosophers and Buddhist philosophers and stuff that have been into poverty and sort of consider themselves not important and to take all status off of them. Well, they do that because it helps contribute to spiritual joy. And I've always been heavily involved in spiritual life with Buddhism for years, and then now Christianity. And George, I'll tell you this: I don't exactly know where to go. There's so many directions to go with this conversation, but one thing that just popped in my mind, I have to say it, is I can't believe how similar Christianity and Buddhism are.
Oh, they absolutely are. I was going to bring that up to you when you were talking about how it echoes atheism. I'm going to go, no, I think it's more like Christianity in a different way. But what would you say, Jeffrey, though, if you met an atheist today and they said, I don't believe, give me proof, what would you say to them? How would you convince them? Or can you?
I would say there is no proof. And no proof I can give you in scientific terms. In other words, there's nothing I can show you with your eyes. I mean, I can start talking about the golden ratio, and the first quantum pattern that was discovered in quantum chaos was the golden ratio. I mean, what in the world? I mean, you can start talking in those terms, but that never. I knew all that stuff before I was a Christian, and it never convinced me that there was a Christian God. Maybe it made me think a little bit there could be a creator. I'm a simulation theorist, so I was kind of flirting with the idea that there's a simulator back before I was converted. But believing in a Christian God is completely, a big leap after anything like that. Playing around philosophically with the idea that there could be a mind that created everything. But to answer your question, there is. Well, okay, I'm talking in Christian terms. So in Christian terms, there is nothing. The Bible's real clear about that we have to have, we walk by faith, not by sight, 2 Corinthians 5:7. I mean, now what is faith? Faith is the experience of God, as it says in Hebrews 11:1. So that's the whole message of Christianity, to experience God. But we don't typically experience Him through our senses until after we've made a strong move to become a Christian. And before then, it would be sort of, you could experience Him, if at all, more likely with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Your mind's eye, you experience Him in sort of an interdimensional way. So to answer your question then, if I had a scientific proof there isn't one, the Bible is clear in saying that we won't have, nothing like that is offered. So then I would proceed to say, well, you could do the same thing I did. If you really want the truth, you could give it a try. I mean, like Buddhism, it's the same thing. You don't understand what Buddhism is until you do it. And the same thing with Christianity is, you don't understand what it is until you do it. Give each an honest try, for example. And maybe I'd say something like that, but you can't understand what it is until you're deeply experiencing it.
Why do we have on a planet, though, that has a God in a universe who may be the creator of everything, so much pain and suffering? Why isn't everything just easy for us?
Yeah, that's the largest theological question there is, and therefore probably the most important. Now, to get right to it, that's what I've been really working on like crazy. I'd say for the last year. And that book, Theologic, well, I've got an article. It's in the book, too, but I've got an article on my website. If you go to my website, there's go to the Calvinism section, the top right. Go to Theology, go to Calvinism, click there, and you'll see an article and a link. And that question is answered there. So let me try to explain it to you in 1 minute. And it basically stems around, I think there is an explanation, and one that makes perfect logical sense, why there's hell and everything. But I think, in my opinion, George, theologians have missed it. Everybody's following Augustine and Wesley and Calvin and all these guys. What if these guys missed something? What if these guys missed something teeny, George, like misinterpreting one word, like the word foreknowledge, or the word all, A-L-L, in a couple verses, and they based massive theology on it in huge encyclopedic-sized books, which is influencing everybody in seminaries and so forth after. Well, I think that's exactly what happened. Let me give you two examples, show you two moves I've made. The word foreknowledge, okay, so there's predestination all over the Bible where God, He creates souls, some souls to be condemned to hell. Well, that's not exactly how it's put in the Bible. Some souls are created and they're going to be destroyed. And then some souls are created and they're going to reside in heaven forever. The Bible's very clear on this, Romans 9 and all over the place. That this goes on. So what do you do with this? Doesn't seem fair. What do you do with this? This is unbelievable. What a cruel, like Richard Dawkins would say, this is the most horrible possible idea of a creator God you could ever conceive of. And, as much as you got to kind of say Dawkins is, you got to answer the question. You can't just say Dawkins is crazy because he's got a great point. Many other people asking the same question. So where I go is I make two moves in some of the work on Calvinism I've done. I've sort of given it a new name called fullness Calvinism. I'm expanding on Calvinist theology. And what I do is I say that God created infinite universes. And why would I say that? Well, I'm just going to follow I've kind of really dropped everything and I'm ironclad theologian now, just following the Bible as a scientific textbook sort of. Now in Colossians, the book of Colossians, chapter 1, 16 and 17, it says God created all things. It says that in Revelation 4:11, other places. What does that word all mean? Now, typically, I would say everywhere, ever since the time of Christ, let's call it 2,000 years ago, whether it was really that time frame or not, people have interpreted that word to mean something like, all the stuff we can see.
Everything.
Or, all the things that exist. Well, if you look at that word in Greek, panta, it really sort of, in my opinion, it means something more like God created everything that could possibly exist, a complete set, packed to the gills. So God created all things, meaning God created everything, every shape of snowflake, every soul, every universe, everything that could be created. And why would that make sense? Well, in Christian terms, God is infinite. Psalm 147:5, and it says also like in the Lord's Prayer, as in heaven and as above so below, kind of concepts enter the picture in Isaiah and the Lord's Prayer and so forth. So you kind of get this idea that, well, if God's infinite, why would He create a finite universe that doesn't make sense, or a finite situation? He would probably have a creation that's infinite to mirror Him, to match what He's all about. It says all over the Bible that there's sort of mirroring down here in creation of what's going on up in heaven. You know, it says in Romans 8, you know, animals are even crying out for God to become more present to them and so forth. There's so much yearning for the two realms to connect. So if you make a very small move and say that God created infinite universes, and then you make another move and say that the word foreknowledge, which is all in several key places in the Bible, where people have typically meant, you know, God had foreknowledge of everything that happened, means that he knew all the future. Well, I found out pretty conclusively that that's not what the word foreknowledge means in the Bible, and did not mean that through history. It's sort of in the last 500 years, people have meant that by, like, God has this clairvoyant information, which of course he does. But the word foreknowledge in predestination theology appears to mean that God had foreknowledge before knowledge. He had knowledge from the start. So to get right to the point, what I found is that God created all souls, and this is Christian theology, this is right out of the Bible, by making these two slight differences in interpretations of the word all and the word foreknowledge. So God created all souls, which is probably infinite, all possible souls that can exist. He went and looked at each one, so he's going to create all of them because he's going to create a fullness, because God is a fullness. Mm-hmm. So he's going to create a creation that mirrors him. He's going to go see what each soul is like, and then he's going to place them in reality where they fit in. So he needs someone to fit the. So you're going to have two kinds of souls: those that are corrupt and those that he can put his Spirit into, because that's what the Bible's all about. Christianity is all about, you know, this Holy Spirit entering people and therefore making them like he is, like the Holy Spirit, like Christ. And so so then we're going to have two types of souls. So therefore, you're going to have an explanation for why sin entered the world, because you're going to have corrupt souls that enter. So if sin enters the world, then it's going to basically corrupt everybody through the concept of original sin. Now, I know a lot of people don't like that concept anymore, but you have to have original sin in theology, because if you don't, you have sinless creatures other than Christ, which the Bible specifically says isn't true. Like, you can have a baby that dies before it does a sin, and then therefore it would be a sinless creature, which is a theological heresy in Christianity. So again, just speaking on Christian terms in that worldview. So now, so you're going to have a reality with sin and pain and horror, and it's a nightmare out there. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Sure.
And apparently, so of course, God comes to earth as Christ and lives through all the same stuff. So apparently, that's not a concern of God. He's concerned with spiritual ecstasy, us contacting him and living beyond the body. It's almost as if the body kind of doesn't matter in a way. There's lots of verses in 1 John, like the world is fading away, your body's corrupt. Philippians 3:20 says, be a citizen of heaven. Galatians 2:20 says, be crucified with Christ and no longer live, but only have Christ living in you. I mean, all these verses that really sort of, in a kind of Buddhistic way, and I don't want to say this is Buddhist terminology, but when I was in Buddhism, I remember there was such a drive to transcend this reality and contact this infinite light called nirvana, which in my opinion, George, I think that Buddhism leads right to God, the Christian God. And that's what when I hit Buddhism, that's what I came across. But so anyway, now, so you've got a God that's created all these souls. He goes and looks at what they're each like, and he puts them in slots in the predestined reality. It's kind of like this computer program,
which would be our bodies, I guess.
Yeah. So you're a soul in a bodysuit that was placed here. You were created during way back, and then you were in some storage area, and then you were placed here. Your body's placed here, and your soul was implanted into it at some point, conception or birth or whatever, and here you are. And you were, before time, planned on, to be right here at this place. Now, so if you make this move and say there's all these souls, and God could see them before he predestined them, because typically what is stated in Christian theology is God created souls to be destroyed or souls to be saved to heaven. Now, that's where you get this really, how can he have such a horrible God? Why would a God create a creature just to go to hell and be tortured forever? Well, what I'm talking about now, if you do make these two shifts in the word foreknowledge and the word all, and these, like Romans 8:29, the word foreknowledge, and then Colossians 1:16-17, the word all there, which I think are fair moves. I've got all kinds of stuff on my website. I think people have just missed this over the last couple thousand years. If you make that move, in my video under my theology tab, the first, go to Calvinism, fullness Calvinism, that video explains everything I'm saying here in about an hour. And you make that move, and all of a sudden it makes complete sense that the following picture emerges: that reality has to have sin, it has to have a hell. And basically what's going on is you have a God that created out of love. You can verify God is made of love by simply focusing on it, him, whatever you want to call it. And if you just hold that for a while, he makes himself known, and you will see it's a God of pure joy.
All right, hold on, Jeff. We're at the top of the hour. We'll come back and talk more. I've got some more stunning questions for you, and we'll take phone calls. Up next, Jeff Grupp joins us again as we talk about, is there a God? We're going to get Jeff's take on it. He used to be an atheist. He isn't anymore. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Jeff Grupp with us, and we will take your phone calls with him this hour. Jeff, the big question, of course, is how is there a God? You know, I've got a difficult time understanding the Big Bang when I have physicists on the air, and nobody seems to be able to explain exactly what they think happened. With God, of course, and taking the posture, of course, that we believe he created or it created everything, how did it come to exist?
Well, the idea is that it didn't. I mean, at least in Christian theology. And because if there wouldn't be nothingness. Nothing. This kind of gets into some other ideas with simulation theory that are extremely important, which I don't know if we'll get to this tonight, but the idea that there could be nothing and then a God, and then the God that creates all these cosmoses, is not in line with Christianity, which would say that God has always existed. And again, it would seem that our universe, our cosmos, is the only one that an infinite God created that's been around eternally, infinitely far back in time, seems to be poor theology in a way. But as far as how God can exist, I'm actually working on that very question right now. And basically, the idea is that if there's an ultimate reality, it's going to be complete. If it's ultimate, it's going to be perfectly simple and perfectly pure and unmixed with anything else. You can't mix it with anything else, or else it's not the ultimate reality anymore. It's what it was plus what it's mixed with. So it's this pure reality. Now that starts to sound like something that is, that is a goodness and is a positive force or something. But I'd have to look over some of my notes to go over exactly what we're talking about. But it appears that reality has it, from what I'm discovering, reality has it built in that there must be, since we are minds that exist now, we can work backwards and deduce in pretty simple logical terms that there must be an infinite mind composed of love and goodness where everything comes from. And we also can do spiritual exercises to have direct awareness of it and find out that thing already exists in our consciousness now. How all that works is best answered with simulation theory, in my opinion, but so it's not like we have to just guess here. We can directly find out for ourselves. And I first found out, like I said, in Buddhism. And when I had my Buddhist experiences, I was an atheist, so I was in a 25-year-old, and I didn't know what I was doing. And it was very clear what I was experiencing was what I'd call Logos. It's a name for Jesus, or really Yahweh was kind of the word that just popped in my mind. And I said to myself, no, this incredible, unbelievable ecstasy and joy I'm feeling and this light I see everywhere after doing just serious meditation for a couple of years in my 20s can't be God because I'm an atheist.
But you see how easy it is, though.
The experience be controlled by the flimsy logic. Now, I've got on my website, if you go to the theology link, and you can scroll down about halfway and you see radio interviews. I've got 2 interviews, George, that answer your exact question of, what would I tell an atheist if they asked me, how's their God? Now, one of those is with Aran Ra, who's a very famous atheist, and we're sort of debating and talking for 2 hours. So it kind of gets into the question you asked in far more detail. But he did the same. He had some sort of experiences, not of Yahweh or Christ or whatever you want to say, but sort of spiritual entities in a spiritual realm. And he said he did the same move. He said they can't be real because it's not possible. It's not logically possible that all this stuff's real. So he went the other direction. And I said to him in the show, I said, well, my experiences I would assume were different and had a different epistemology than yours did, because mine, sort of like Paul on Damascus Road in Acts 9, made me drop all of my life and go this direction because I knew what I saw. In my epistemology, I knew what I saw was real.
Well, I'm a believer. I'm just puzzled at how all of it started. And, of course, because science can't even explain why we're here, that to me is one of the big answers of why there's a God, because that's the logical reason. If science can't even tell us why we started and how we started, and I don't mean little atoms and molecules coming together. There's got to be.
Science can't tell us what a mind is, George.
Yeah, they don't know. And
I mean, our mind is. You look at our mind, George, and it is a supernatural entity. Okay, everybody listening to this can go and look in your mind right now, and you see it is not made out of bricks and gears and plastic. It's not made out of material world stuff. But you've got every scientist out there telling us that we're supposed to believe that this hunk of meat called the brain has a supernatural, self-aware, possibly free-willed feeling consciousness in it.
And every section has something to do with what we do.
Pardon me?
And every section of that brain, that piece of meat, has something to do with how we function.
Yeah, I mean, you can correlate, you're thinking about this, and this part of your brain lights up with activity, but it doesn't matter if what I'm doing is thinking about the number 2. You don't see the number 2 in there. That's part of my consciousness, which I can see by looking inside my consciousness, but you can't see it by looking at nerve cells, which look like little hunks of meat. So you've got a very serious issue there, where all of us can verify that our consciousness, I would just go ahead and say it's non-physical. When I look at a feeling, it doesn't look like a brick. So it's got the opposite properties of a brick. So I'm just going to conclude if it's got the opposite properties of a brick, a physical thing, I'm just going to conclude, well, the opposite properties means non-physical thing. My direct awareness verifies that, but unfortunately we've all got very prestigious and all these great people that are academics out there saying, no, don't believe what you can directly verify. Believe us, it's physical. You're not really seeing what you're seeing. It's not really non-physical. It's just part of your brain, which I think is a serious problem because it's very non-logical. I was listening to Jack Gallant, UC Berkeley psychologist the other day, and he was saying, you have your brain and it's working, and then you have this emergent property called consciousness. And I'm thinking, what? You did not just. I mean, I've heard that before, but I mean, how can you just write off consciousness as an emergent property? That's a contradiction, really, to state that.
Let's go to the phones for you now. Perry is in Lompoc, California. Perry, take it away.
Hi, George. Thank you, and thank you for having a wonderful guest that you have on.
Sure thing. My pleasure.
It's really food for thought, and thank you for being the first phone call of the new year. One brief thing, and I'll go into my main point. There has to be something other from meat to meat or brain to brain. And in falling in love, we know there are chemicals there, but what starts the chemical? It has to be something spiritual before anything. My mom was dying in late 2013, and I went outside in my garage here, and the wind blew, and the Pope John Paul II said that the Holy Spirit lives in the wind. Well, it went right through me, and the Holy Spirit told me that Mom is going to be okay, but not in words, though, but just a feeling, and then my brain translated it into words.
There's a magic there, Jeffrey, isn't there?
Yeah, you're saying, you've got the love and then the chemical. Well, the chemical is an idea in our minds. I mean, we have this idea of the outside world, and part of that idea of the outside world is your brain. That's something you're told exists. You've never seen your own brain, but you're told it's there. And some people are born and don't have brains or really have hardly anything. That's something that many people know. Just go to my website, look under simulation theory tab, and then simulation theory tab again, and you'll see an article written by Lorber out of the journal Science where they're talking about this hydrocephalic who has really no brain. He's an honor student in mathematics. So there's so many questions about it, but I mean, if we take our direct evidence of what we see, we have this idea of the outside world which is filled with contradiction. I mean, everything reduces to a contradiction. This is the kind of serious problem that's been known in philosophy for 2,500 years since Zeno. Something like a location is a contradiction. Something like a hunk of matter is reducible to a simple contradiction. And pretty much everybody just kind of ignores this and says, oh, well, okay, we don't know what to do, so we'll just assume there's a solution and we'll move on and study reality as if it's real. What if it's just our consciousness and there's nothing outside that represents it in the way we think it does? So that leads to another question. Well, then what you have left is consciousness. Now, you look at your consciousness, and a couple of things are pretty interesting about it. First of all, it seems non-physical, it seems spiritual, and you can use it to directly connect to God. I've got a paper on my site called The Inner Mysticism of Perpetual Belief in God. If you continually just believe in God, it says in Luke 8:50, to believe is enough. Well, what people typically do is they think believing is kind of like, I believe in God is kind of like I'm a Republican, or I believe the death penalty is bad or something. It's like a worldview. No, it says in the Bible, believing is like this meditation. It's like this practice you do all the time. You sink into this deep belief. And I'm telling you, this is like my favorite piece of research I've been on lately, and I think it's this sort of thing I pulled out of the Bible I don't think anybody has for 2,000 years. If you stay in a state of belief, looking right at God, you experience basically what in Christian meditation you experience the exact same thing that Buddhists do. You get to the same point. You experience this omnipresent light everywhere that you know is God. And that's really the whole point of everything. That's why we're here. I mean, when you're in that state, the pain and the misery of the world, yes, you want to help everybody and you want to love and all that. But, man, there's a bigger picture, and our little flimsy bodies and so forth are just not part of it. So to get to the answer to your question, the idea that there's love, well, that's the point, because that's a window into the truth, which is that we are our minds that can't be explained by science but can be explained by God. And to verify that, you just look in your mind and look and see what's behind it all, and you'll find out pretty quickly that there's a creator that's behind it all.
There are some who literally take the Bible as gospel, and they're more than entitled to do that, of course. But what are your thoughts on just using that Bible word for word, Jeff? Is that the right thing to do?
Well, from my experience that I described in the first hour, that's the direction I went in a big way, and it's just more and more up to this moment. I mean, pretty much from what I saw, I have to believe. I'd be crazy not to believe it was absolutely literal. So then I take it as it's like the science textbook, and then try to figure out, rather than try to make it according to my presumptions and thoughts and so forth, I've kind of thrown away all of my preconceived ideas, science and everything, and tried to figure out how it's logical, it's scientific on its terms, to take it as absolute fact. And that's kind of what my whole website's about and what I've been doing for the last number of years. And, man, when you go that direction, it's surprising how many theologians have made dumb mistakes that just, interpreting this word this way, like we described earlier, and then, everybody afterwards follows, and then Christianity is thrown off track. You're like, why would God even allow that to happen in the first place? And so but to get to your question, what I found is if you stay in the absolute literal idea of God as the Holy Spirit, omnipresent creator, an infinite light that's everywhere, and you believe in him all the time. Hebrews 12:2 says, fix your eyes on him. Now, we don't see him with our literal eyes, we see him with the eyes of our heart, the eyes of our mind, the eyes of our feeling. You do that, and the reward is everything. You experience him directly, and then when you get to that point, nothing else matters.
No, that's absolutely true. George in Corpus Christi, Texas, now with us. Hi, George. Go ahead.
Hi. I guess let me see. Is our subconscious our really higher consciousness?
I think so. Yeah. That what you're saying is
like our dreams.
Go ahead.
Well, like we have dreams and we have precognitive stuff, or things like that. There's certain people are gifted and they're higher and they're closer to God. You know that I've heard other pastors say that when the word holy comes from the word whole, which is God, because he's entirely whole, and thus the word holy. Mm-hmm. So are we inching towards that as humans? Are we? I watch a lot of that.
Are we going to be godlike, Jeff?
Well, yeah, that's the whole point of the Bible. I mean, there's this idea out there that the Bible says everything's going to get unbelievably terrible. That comes from the theology of dispensationalism, Jeremy Darby, and they could be right. But what I see the Bible saying is that the church is going to expand, and then God's going to come back and basically recreate this reality that we're all going to live together in. And we're sort of, the earth is being prepared for that now. So in a way, things are getting way better. Now, on the other hand, though, we all know that you walk into the average church and it's a complete joke. Everybody's hypocrites, and it's just not a pretty picture. I mean, I remember the same thing when I was a Buddhist. I was so into Buddhism. And I lived in Albuquerque when I was a Buddhist, and that's like a bastion of Buddhist activity. And I remember, man, most of these people that I'm associating with that are saying they're Buddhists aren't really doing it, and they're sort of making it look bad. Now I see the same thing in Christianity going on. But so are we getting holier? Yes, we should be. Like this show, for example, just builds holiness through the world. It says in Isaiah, the whole earth cries out to his glory. There should be some element of that that's building and building and building through time. We should be able to sense it. And those of us that are really crying out to God, we should be able to feel this, and we should be able to feel us getting closer to him, and we should be able to feel the whole world sort of moving to the eschaton, which is when everything changes. Sort of like Kurzweil's got that singularity point. I mean, I don't know if I want to compare the two, but often when I hear Kurzweil talk about the singularity point, I'm like, well, the Bible talks about Christ's return as the eschaton. It's almost like a singularity point where, boom, everything's different. All of a sudden, the sky looks different, and it's all over, and we've got a different existence. So I have a very optimistic view, to say the least, of the future. But what the caller just said is really a great point about dreams and subconscious and so forth being a better. We're more into our ordinary state of consciousness is like our least intelligent consciousness. I mean, our dream state, our subconscious. I mean, the Bible is real clear about dream state has this huge intelligence, can predict the future. Coat of Many Colors fellow, that was his whole profession in life. And Joseph from the Coat of Many Colors. And so, I mean, yeah, we shouldn't be sitting here thinking that, there's this big movement from what I see among Christians is, anything to do with our subconscious and anything like that is bad. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, have you read the Old Testament? Because these guys are having visions, dream interpretation. There's a huge explosion of all kinds of activity, and these are the guys that are talking directly to God. So, yeah, your caller brings up a huge point, which is kind of missed in spiritual circles today.
Interesting take. We've got about a minute to go before the break, Jeff. And once again, tell people about your website and where they can get some of your works.
Oh, yeah, praiseandlove.net or simulationtheory.net goes to the same spot. And, the simulation theory is what I'm really into, and, of course, trying to make sense of Christian theology. They're kind of one project. I've got a bunch of sermons up there. I'm involved in preaching to the poorest people in Michigan, and I've got a lot of that work up there, some art, and it's just kind of a fun place to go. And if you're interested in God, it's trying to make sense of it all, like what you're asking, George.
Well, you've made a 180 turn on this, haven't you?
Yeah, yes, because I was an atheist. But then again, the whole spiritual thing and experiencing God through Buddhism is kind of just a continuation of what I was doing before. I just didn't know it. I just had my terms wrong, and my heart was off.
And you're glad you did this?
Well, I have no choice. I mean, just like Paul in the book of Acts and the road to Damascus, I mean, he was the guy that killed Christians, and then he has a vision of God, and then all of a sudden he's the guy that creates half the New Testament. I mean, I'm not saying I'm like, at that level or something, but that's how I was. I was a hater of Christianity, literal hater of Christianity.
Hold on for a second, Jeff. We'll come back and wrap things up with final questions. And welcome back, Jeff Grupp with us. Jeff, let me ask you a question. We haven't talked about angels yet. And if you believe in God, you've got to believe in angels. Where do you sit there?
Well, George, that's what I saw. That when I was telling you that, I told myself I wasn't going to say this on air, but here we go.
You have to now.
Yeah, right. The ghost I thought I saw in the corner of the house, then it got more and more vivid, and I was absolutely terrified of it. That was an angel. I thought it was a woman in a wedding dress. As it got more and more clear. First it was a feeling, and then it kind of was a feeling and a vague image, and it got enormously clear at the very end. It was in my dreams. And it was, I mean, it wasn't like, it was a winged angel. It was very, very vivid, incredibly vivid. As vivid as you and I right now. So yeah, that's where I stand. Where I stand on that. I don't know, why, it's disclosed to me, but it was, so I go with it.
Yep, absolutely. Let's go to Tom in Placerville, California, west of the Rockies. Hi, Thomas. Go ahead.
Hello, George. Nice to speak with you again.
You too, Tom.
Hello, Jeff. Boy, it's good to talk to you. I could share some things with you. I, too, have seen angels. In fact, they rescued my son and I on 3 occasions out in the desert.
Wow, 3.
And I just want to share with everybody, demon orbs are real. The Nephilim are real. And then I want to share that it says the truth shall set you free. Well, I used to be a believer, and I studied a lot of religions all my life, and I'm no longer a believer. And now I know. And, I can believe the sun's coming up tomorrow, but I don't know it. And so because of that knowing, now I'm accountable. And because of that accountability, I have a spiritual war going on inside of me. And I have fear of the Lord because I don't want to hurt God. I don't want to upset him. I am his will. And it just rocked my world. And I wanted to share that in knowing that God is there, you can find a love for him. Because when I believed about him and believed in, how can you love something that you just believe in? You have to know it to love it. And then my question is when you reach this state of knowing here on the third dimension, do you feel that you attained what you came here for, and then we're gone?
Yeah, sort of. I don't know why. I mean, God knew all the souls that were going to be in heaven at the beginning, so why do we have to go through all this? The only answer I know to that question is to experience the ecstasy of Christ. When you're at that moment, and that it kind of all makes sense. You're like, yeah, okay, I get it why I'm here. I can't explain it logically, at least not yet, but it kind of I get it. This is why I'm here, and everything is perfect, really, because you're living as Him. Galatians 2:20. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. But what you're saying about knowing versus belief is a huge point. What you're saying is, I don't want to just believe like I believe I'm a Republican and I believe in God. No, you're talking about knowing Him. You experience Him. That's what faith really is. A lot of times in the atheism, theism debates, atheists will attack Christians and say, "Oh, your belief is a ridiculous, non-scientific worldview tactic." And no, belief is very clear in the Bible. It's experience of God. We're supposed to live in that all the time. And it says in Romans 14:23, anything that's not of that, of experience of God, of faith, is sin, which kind of makes sense. I mean, we're either going to be on our own terms and then, and we're, living in the human level, or we're going to be living as, in God's level, is in His ways, with Him possessing us. But I've sort of got a different take on belief, though. It's sort of a higher, another idea to add to what I was saying earlier. I think belief is a meditation technique we're supposed to be doing all the time. Belief is like a power. It's like a force in us, and I'm not talking about the worldview kind of belief, like I believe I'm a Republican. No, I'm talking about meditating on and focusing on Christ in a state of belief all the time. I've got that article on my website. If you go to the theology tab and go down to the prayer section, it's called the inner mysticism of simple, perpetual, verb-like belief in God. In my opinion, that's the most incredible thing that I've come across, and I think it was handed to me through prayer and in Christ that He gave me this info. It's just basically it's a different way of looking at it. It's already in the Bible, right? In Luke 8:50 and all kinds of verses all over the place. And that belief is not what we think it is. It's not a worldview. Belief is this profound force in our mind. It's a direct connection to God that all of us have been given. We just have to do it, and people don't really even know to do it, even though it's all over the Bible. So anyway, check that out if you want. But I mean, I agree with everything you're saying about the lower form of belief being completely inferior to knowing God, and that's what everybody needs.
Jeff, you talk about how being in poverty is important too. Explain that. Yes.
Yeah, George, I don't know what it is. I work in a prison. I worked in a mainstream church for a while, and then left that. And now I work in a prison. And man, that's where I was brought to. That's why I became a Christian. God wanted me to do this, and that's what I do. And man, it is the best. I absolutely love it. I mean, I go there tomorrow. I can't wait to get there. But anyways, I don't know what it is, George, but the prison that I work in is on fire for God. Like I've never. It's like a monastery. And everybody has nothing. I'm working with guys who have abuse. No family comes to see them. They've got nothing except each other, and then chaplains like me that come and see them every day. And this is an unbelievable fire of the Spirit. And I've come to this belief that, I know it, that poverty is a major part of this. And I've sort of tried to become impoverished. Now, I've got a wife and kids and so forth, so I can't be literally impoverished. But when I'm in the jail, I've had some hard times over the last 4 months. Not anything disastrous, but stuff that's really it gets your attention. You're like, wow, I don't know what's going to happen and stuff like that. And I've just found myself going into the prison certain days and just sort of like, I don't care, because I'm living in the hiding place of God. Psalm 32:7, you are my hiding place. And I just rest there in the experience of God, and it is that experience is fueled in a big way when you have nothing, and when your life is, you just don't know what to do, and you let go of it all. So there's some kind of, poverty is a key ingredient, and this is a huge theme in Buddhism too, absolutely massive theme. And the world is sort of the problem here. People absolutely underestimate a couple things. One, how big of a deal the world is in corrupting our spiritual potential, and also how big of a spiritual reality there is beyond the physical appearances of this world. And you know what, George? This world isn't really giving anybody a whole lot of pleasure. I mean, yeah, it's fun to watch TV and a ball game and get drunk or whatever. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's just escapism, and is not giving anybody any kind of joy. And man, you have one taste of the Spirit of God, it is all over. You say, I was missing everything. Now, I mean, do you start with that with Buddhism or Christianity? I don't know. Just be hungry and go after the truth and talk to it and focus on it and meditate on it and read books. And then you figure out, you don't want to miss this whole boat here and go through a life where you're on Prozac and depressed and things are painful and so forth, because that's what the world offers. Christianity, like Buddhism, is very clear that if you want to live in a lot of hardship, focus right on the world, and if you don't, focus on what is beyond the world, which is God.
Let's go to Deborah, first-time caller, Woolwine, Virginia. Hi, Deborah. Good morning.
Oh, my God, dude, this is one of the best guests I've ever heard on any of your shows, and I'm on fire, and I understand everything he's saying, and I just want you to know that. I see your good works, and I feel that we're in a time of revelations when so much is being revealed. We do have a problem because we do identify with the body too much. Everything we see with our eyes is temporary. We even had a man tell us that, Einstein. It's an illusion, albeit a persistent one. And, yes, we've got to get past what the world gives to us. Dude, you are awesome. I can't wait to get on your simulationtheory.net. I am on fire. I just crossed over recently of that threshold of being overwhelmed by the world into total peace. And I know I sound frantic now, but I'm just on fire, dude. And I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And it's like yeast. You just get a little bit of it, and it spreads everywhere. I put myself in a location of pure isolation because I lost everything. And I always wondered why I'm here, and now I understand. And it's a peace that you can't get from anything that the world offers. God is love, 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 love. And you are amazing, and I just wanted to thank you.
Well, wow, I'm very happy to hear what you're saying.
You don't get bigger compliments than that, Jeff.
Yeah. But I just want to say that if anything good you see in me, I'm just telling you, I am bent on fire for God. That's all I care about. That's all I pursue all the time. So if you're seeing anything good here, it's just you're seeing nothing but Christ in me, and He's a holy fire. And yeah, one thing I'm picking up on what she said is it kind of, it's what we were saying earlier is you're not going to get a lot of this by logic. I mean, I'm trying to learn how to explain some of these things like predestination and so forth, like we already talked about. But really, when you come down to it, like she's saying, this life is real short, where all of us are waking up saying, wow, I can't believe it's 2019, and now it's going to be 2020 and 2021. And pretty soon we're going to all be dead. I mean, and what's the point? The point is, strangely, is to not live in this world. The point is to live in the infinite, which we all know is what's real. We all know there's some point here. Even when I was an atheist, I was like really puzzled, like, there's got to be just some point, even if, how could I evolve to have this mind and so forth? I don't believe in evolution anymore, but you're not really going to come to this, but by experience, and experience always trumps logic. You can create a logical theory, and they can stand for 1,000 years, and then one solid empirical observation that contradicts it, and everybody throws the theory away and takes the observation, because observation is stronger. So in other words, our experience is far stronger than anything we can think, and there's really only one experience to be going for. And what she's saying about she lost everything, that's how, when I go into the prison and work, I go into the prison, no cell phone, I have to take off my cross necklace. I mean, you're stripped down to just, it's your soul walking through that place. And man, you've got nothing. You do that day after day after day, and it becomes it's a vacation. It's absolutely incredible to have nothing. So I mean, that's such a focal point of contacting what is infinite in God all around.
Hey, we're out of time, by the way, but thank you. And Jeff, thank you as well. Jeff's website linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com, and his websites simulationtheory.net and praiseandlove.net.